welcome. I'm delighted to have Dorothy Lichtenstein and Donna De Salvo here today to speak about this legendary artist and pioneer of pop art. If anyone is like me, this period of Lichtenstein's career was very unknown, and so this exhibition truly has been a revelation and a joy to see and to learn about. To tell you a little bit about our speakers, Dorothy Lichtenstein is the president of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, which is dedicated to the encouragement of a broad understanding of the art of Roy Lichtenstein and the artists of his time. After studying art history at Arcadia University, formerly Beaver College, she became director of the pioneering Bianchini Art Gallery in New York, organizing exhibitions and projects dealing with emerging pop art. She's equally committed to scientific research, as she also serves on the Leadership Council of the New York Stem Cell Foundation and is a recipient of the Chevalier of Arts and Letters from the French government. Donna De Salvo is a curator, writer, and consultant who has worked with numerous national and international artists and museums and collections. It's a pleasure to have her back at the Parrish, where in the 1990s, she was the Robert Lehman curator. She organized numerous exhibitions here, although at our former location, including an installation of the work of Maren Hassinger. She is currently Senior Adjunct Curator Special Projects at the Dia Art Foundation. She held several positions at the Whitney Museum of American Art, becoming its first Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Programs, where she oversaw the museum's curatorial department and program of exhibitions and acquisitions, and was centrally involved in the development and design of the Whitney's new building and exhibition galleries. She was the curator of the seminal exhibition, and one that I studied as a young graduate student at the Center for Curatorial Studies, Hand-Painted Pop, American Art in Transition, 1955 to 1962, which is at the LA MoCA in 1993. History in the Making was made possible by many individuals. It was co-organized by the Colby College Museum of Art in Waterville, Maine, and the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. The exhibition is co-curated by Elizabeth Finch, Lunder, Curator of American Art at Colby, and Marshall N. Price, Nancy A. Nasher, and David J. Hamaseger, Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Nasher. And it was organized here at the Parrish, shepherded by our curator, Chief Curator, Alicia Longwell. Support for this exhibition and its national tour is provided by the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. Additional catalog support is provided by the Wyeth Foundation for American Art. The presentation of Roy Lichtenstein, History in the Making, 1948 to 1960 at the Parrish is made possible thanks to the generous support of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, the Lane and Norman Peck Fund for Exhibitions, Bank of America Private Bank, Gagosian Gallery, Barbara and Richard Lane, Barbara Bertozzi Castelli, Ellen Kantrowitz, and Jacqueline Brody. Thank you all again and enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank Alicia Longwell and Corinne Ernie for their invitation to come and do something in conjunction with the exhibition. And I also want to extend my thanks to Frank Avila and Justin Brancato of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, who were very wonderful in helping me put some images together. And most of all, I want to thank Dorothy Lichtenstein for agreeing to come have this conversation. So I think this is going to be a bit history, maybe a little gossip thrown in, I'm hoping, and hopefully something that illuminates what I was mostly hearing that some people were saying when they came to see the exhibition, History in the Making, where are the dots? So we're starting with, as you can see, where are the dots? But just to kind of set the framework of, it's interesting to think back to a time of the radicality of pop art and actually how. Tell me if everything's moving. Oh, there we go. And what this must have been like at that period of time in '62, and the artists, in fact, who were associated with this moment, of course, Roy and Andy Warhol, just a few of the artists of that time, James Rosenquist, and an artist you may not know as well, Rosalind Drexler. And there were women involved with pop, although not maybe as well known.
There was a woman-run gallery, the Jill Cornbly Gallery.
It was Jill
also
Cornbly, that's right.
that time.
That's right. And so, hand-painted pop that Kelly mentioned was sort of my entree into a lot of this early work. I think it's the first time I met Roy and Dorothy. I came out with Paul Schimmel, who was my co-curator, to look at what we hoped was going to be these great gems of early work by Roy Lichtenstein, which you now have out on view. And we were really interested in examining this period of the pre-pop work. How did it come about? Was there just this complete break from everything, as often at that time, the history books really characterized it as just an end. But I think, as we all know, history is a very
persistent
and at times rather dodgy construct. And so, one of the things we were talking earlier about, what was going on in New York at that time. And when did you first come to New York?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn.
Oh, you grew up, that's right, you're a Brooklyn home?
That's
okay,
right.
So,
okay. And I was always trying to get over the bridge as I approached my teenage years. So, I mean, I am a New Yorker.
You're a New Yorker, yeah. So did you go to art museums? Were you interested in art?
Well, I lived close to the Brooklyn Museum, which was great. I mean, I could walk there, and the library was right there, too.
Oh, which is a great library.
Yeah, so they were really two great cultural institutions.
Yeah. Importance of public institutions. Just want to give a shout out. So were you aware, of any, I mean, one of the things that we were interested in when we did this exhibition was sort of looking at what the artists were looking at. And in that period of artists, particularly after the war, trying to figure out what they were going to do. And surrealism was, of course, so important. And Newman and Rothko were very involved with even forming a school called the Subjects of the Artist School. Really this desire to move outside of Paris, essentially, as the center of it all, to New York.
But also, a lot of European artists had come to New York at that time because they were really escaping the devastation of World War II.
I mean, it's always interesting to sort of ponder what would have happened. I mean, it's like an old chestnut now, but like what would have happened had those artists not come? And, and this kind of mashup. I mean, that's the word now, I can use that. Nobody, I mean, they wouldn't have used that back in the 40s, but this kind of, combination of all these different ideas. And certainly that they were so interested in looking at myth and mythology and the unconscious. And, I think we'll get to that in terms of what Roy and some of the other artists were looking at in this earliest work. And just a couple of other reminders of artists such as Adolf Gottlieb and artists who were looking at Northwest Coast Indian art. Steve Wheeler, who was a part of a group called the Indian Space Painters, looking at these very flat forms. Now, of course, I think we think about the use of Native American sources in a very different way, and the artists were appropriating them as from a formal perspective, not necessarily from the anthropological side. But it's interesting to see some of the forms and representing, again, this search for what was going to be an American style, ultimately. So. Pollock and de Kooning, and I always love that 49 Life magazine. It's kind of amazing to think that Life actually did an article on Jackson Pollock, calling him Jack the Dripper at that time.
That's right.
Right? I mean, it's true.
But they shortly thereafter did one on Roy called, "Is He the Worst Artist in America?"
Gosh. Oh, wow. Wow, it's interesting. I think the popular press hasn't really changed. Sadly, I'm sad to say, in the US, because usually things don't wind up on the evening news unless it's something really just ridiculous. It's rarely, singing the praises of artists, but nonetheless, and I think a lot about, did Roy talk to you much about de Kooning and Pollock.
Well, you met Roy when you did hand painting.
Yes, yes.
You know he was not that.
No, he was an elegantly quiet man.
He was an elegantly quiet man. But of course, yes, he looked at that. And I mean, they, not just de Kooning and not just Picasso and earlier artists, but even minimalists and Jasper. And he was looking at all that work and responding.
Mm. I mean, I think that has to be hard for young artists to, you know, there's the famous story of Rauschenberg going to de Kooning and asking to erase a work, which is a kind of Dada type gesture, but in a way, we were saying earlier, it's almost like you have to kill the father, but at the same time, the ghost is still there. And I think that's what's so fascinating is how every artist borrows from the other artist, but then you have to make it your own. And
that usually makes for success.
It's usually the
Yes.
good combo for that. Yeah.
A
By
good
the way, I was a
combination.
studio major as an undergraduate, and I was a really bad painter, so I became a curator instead. So I just had great admiration for painters. But so here, you know, looking at some of Roy's early some of the very early work, you know, and as you were saying, looking at, you know, Picasso, you know, I mean, I love this. It's very self-possessed, this self-portrait with easel. There's like the way he's looking out, you know, almost breaking the fourth wall when you think in theater.
Well, that's, yes, and I mean, I also think of the, it's the Goya painting.
Yes, yes,
And,
yes.
I mean, a lot of artists do self-portraits, really. I mean, I don't think Roy's expectations, or really in those early 60s, any artist's expectations was to really make it big, whatever that meant. I mean, I thought, all thought, well, maybe they'd have to die first, you know, and then be recognized posthumously.
So did
But-
he go to school on the GI Bill? Was he part? No, he was not that. Because there were many artists who did after the
Yes.
war go.
He was at Ohio State University. It was one of the, at that time, few universities that actually gave a degree in painting. And then he was drafted and was in World War II. And he went, actually he was going to, his plan was to live in Paris, which a number of artists did. Ellsworth Kelly
Yes,
did.
absolutely.
But Roy's one story is that he got to to Picasso's door on the Quai de whatever it was, and then he thought, why is he going to want to see me? I'll just be disturbing him.
He didn't knock on the
So
door.
he didn't. But that was because he had a certain reticence about himself. And then because his father was ill, he was furloughed home. And then he was offered a job as an assistant professor at Ohio State University.
OSU,
Yeah,
which unbelievably did not give him tenure.
that's right. We discovered.
Yeah, it's still kind of unbelievable to think about that.
It says a lot, though.
Well, in a way.
There were two artists that were let go, and I think it was political. And I don't want to mention the other artists, but Roy, they told he was a very good teacher, but they didn't think he had a future as an artist. And the other artist was told, we think you're going to be a great artist, but you're not a very good teacher. So
Well, you know, actually.
History again.
Yes, I was going to say we're lucky, actually, that he did not.
You know, I think so, because, I mean, eventually he wound up teaching at Oswego, but his big break came when he got a job teaching at Rutgers Douglas.
That's right. He was with many great artists there.
Alan Capro was there. George Siegel was going for a master's. Fluxus was coming and doing happenings there. I mean, it was a moment, really, where he had a lot of encouragement. Alan Capro is the one that sent him
to Ivan Karp.
at the Castelli Gallery.
So just a couple of more examples of, again, sort of looking at, what were the old masters. I guess now we really think of them as the old masters, but the influence of Picasso and Klee. But again, still trying to find his own way to come to a style and to find this marriage of form and content, ultimately. Right there. Oh, and there he is in his studio at The Ohio State University. So I know when we spoke to him, and there have been a number of wonderful scholars, David Diescher, there's a great, some essays in the catalog here, that he spoke very much about Hoyt Sherman, who ran the Flash Lab at The Ohio State University. And I think you actually have the Lichtenstein Foundation, it's named, isn't it? The Sherman Flash Lab, wasn't that something you
We
were?
did support that.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that was a really big influence on Roy. I mean, he felt it really changed him.
So this is an image of the Flash Lab, and just the way it operated was, I think he would, and even there's some drawings that show how he would flash these images right on the screen.
For a really short time, like 30 seconds sometimes, and then have the artists draw what they retained or thought they saw.
I mean, there's some really fascinating articles about this, the idea of, because if you think about something also that is that quick, it's almost like the way advertisements work. That you have to have something very fast, you get it all, or the idea even of the after image. Like when you look in the light and then there's that after image. So all these perceptual things.
At my age, I don't know what they're advertising. I just remember.
Well, advertising now is not like it was in earlier days, because you certainly don't have to show the product anymore. So, it's quite interesting how influential advertising was in that 50s generation in particular. So, I mean, one of the things, of course, that really, when you see it, is the Washington crossing the Delaware. Now, this is circa 51, and I suspect it is 51 because the Emanuel Lutz painting, which is what this is based on, was painted in 1851, so it would have been the 100th birthday. And this is on view at the Met. So, that Roy chose to make that painting in some way, but also to take a painting like that, which hardly comes into the realm of Picasso,
Right. But to take the grandiosity out of it, really.
I mean, it's really, poor old George there is really reduced to, but again, I think back to like Newman and Rothko and the subjects of the artist school. Like, what's the subject going to be? Because they're moving out of abstraction, and then there's this real struggle to figure out what to paint. And so that's why I think these early works, are they're so fundamental, because actually it's all there. I mean, stylistically, yes, where he arrives is different, but that's why I think it's so interesting to look at these early works, because oftentimes there's such a misperception of artists going, from A to Z, when I always think it's like A to D, back to C, over to E, oh, I'm at Z. But I mean, really that kind of way that things evolve. And that's why this show, I think, is so important. I'm so happy it's here. And then in 1953, of course, Larry Rivers does the Washington Crossing the Delaware, which is in MoMA's collection. And of course, he meant it. I mean, in the midst of Pollock and Rothko, I mean, it's a pretty outrageous painting to make.
Yes.
And so, but I find it really fascinating that, Roy was sort of there first, but yet it has that gestural style if you think about, the lessons of de Kooning. And I think Larry Rivers, who of course lived out in Southampton for many years.
He was an early arrival, yeah.
He was a very early arrival. So did you know him in Southampton then?
Yes, absolutely. And in New York too.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, he was truly a New York character. And really a rule breaker, I mean, in his life and his art.
Didn't he have the famous sculpture in front of his house?
That was
caused-
later.
Yeah.
Legs.
Was it legs that came down
Giant
from the
pair of
front of the house?
legs.
Yeah. I remember when Paul Schimmel and I visited his studio on 14th Street, and all I can say is it's very good it wasn't the Me Too moment. There were a few outrageous paintings that, you know, I just like took it in stride, but
Right.
you know, because he really could be quite baudy, I would say. What was the name of his book? Was it Did I Do It? He did a book signing at the Parrish years ago.
Was it the unauthorized?
Yes, the unauthorized autobiography. Yeah, it was indeed a character and a wonderful artist. But, you know, again, this sort of outrageous quality of taking what Newman and Rothko and all these guys were, you know, doing that was, and by the way, I'm a huge Newman fan, just want to say that, but this incredibly transcendent, you know, kind of subject matter, and then to do something like this, which is really rather banal, ultimately, as a subject, as you said, the grandiosity of it all.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Larry hung around at the Cedar Bar, and I mean, Roy ventured to the Cedar Bar when he came in from Ohio, but he wasn't a big drinker. I will say one funny story, though.
Please,
Bob
please.
Rosenberg told me that when he was at the Cedar Bar, Franz Klein, who was a big drinker, said to me, Franz Klein was so drunk that he asked me to drive him home.
Wow, I have to say, I think we're rather tame today by comparison.
So, because really, I mean, the pop artists, all they did was usually after an opening on a Saturday, go out for a Chinese meal, which was affordable.
No heavy drinking.
There wasn't really heavy drinking.
Yeah. It's very interesting to think of the different times, and also how the New York art world was quite different. So, you know, this idea of these American subjects, and of course, there are many images of, you know, cowboys and Indians, and, you know, I was looking for something from 1951, The Wonders of Wikipedia, and I mean, the entries for 1951 alone were there was like 100 of them, and by the way, like actors I'd never heard of, but, you know, the myth of the American West, and also the cowboy and the Western as an American export. So, you know, it was really a very, very important, you know, theme, and this is just one example, a cowboy. And I kind of love the way the gun, this very simplified kind of form that's happening.
Yes.
And comical. I mean, you know, I think there's already irony in this work at this point.
Oh, yeah, there is, definitely. I mean, I just think that's how Roy really looked at the world, sort of, he looked at it ironically.
He had, I mean, from the times I met him, he did have that kind of dry sense of humor.
Very. I mean, and you had to kind of know him well to get him to relax and really share it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I was like the curator with the notebook sort of situation. But he was very gracious. And then the capture of Roanoke Island. And I will say that the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation website is really phenomenal. And you should just spend some time. They have, all the images are organized in the image duplicator. Along with some comparative illustrations, and this is one that comes actually this American history book, you know, so that he was looking at for subjects coming out of American history and then portraying them it's almost a kind of de-skilling. I was thinking about this because to a certain extent he really was an extraordinary draftsman. And, you know, the quality of the line in his drawings, and also in printmaking, which he did a lot of in the 40s.
He always loved printmaking. I mean, I think printmaking throughout his life was as important to him as painting. I mean, yeah, I think he made prints for almost every series he did. And occasionally he made a print and then decided to do a painting.
Went the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, of course, this is a really great one, the $10 bill. And again, really has humor to it, But even the way, I want to almost see Ben-Day dots in it in a funny kind of way, because there's already the beginnings of a sort of understanding. And also because when something is printed, it functions quite differently on so many levels.
Well, that's right. Well, I mean, even the Ben-Day dots were used instead of a more subtle shading and shadowing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could do double dots or
Yes, yeah.
halftone dots.
Yeah, you could
and
build
so
up.
You could build,
Yeah. Again, he's always thinking of these formal solutions. And I think that's, the great thing of Roy's work is that there's always this back and forth of looking at subjects that, in a way, live within the popular imagination, popular culture, but then he brings it back to something that, conflates the two, that looks at a sort of the fine art reference that exists. And I think it's the real genius of his work, was his capacity to choose subjects and then portray them in ways that link you to the world, but they also link you to the history of art. And, that's like, what more can you want?
Right.
Basically.
He did teach art history, but I mean, if you know all the coffee shops that were Greek, I mean, he actually got his idea for the Temple of Apollo from one of those coffee cups. So I think he was he was really always thinking about art. In some ways, I mean, I think I mentioned this to you, that he was really more conceptual. I mean, rather than a romantic painter. I mean, even the brushstrokes that he used later on were, they were conceptualized brushstrokes, but then there were also the ones he made with a rag.
Yes.
But they were kind of conceptualized to
Yes.
start with. I mean, he worked on plastic, because if you did a brushstroke on that, it came out looking like it had the modulation.
Flattened. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he's like constructing paintings. I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. And just another, one of these, again, looking at, this is a tourist postcard, and then his, Indian with papoose. And, these sculptures that he was making as well. I mean, that's a later image, but, with a, it's like an Alaskan totem, probably.
Yes.
And, so, and, was he interested a lot in also in folk art? Did he speak much about that to you? Or did he collect it?
No, not really. Although, I mean, the earlier wooden sculpture were probably from odd pieces of furniture that fell apart, like the leg fell off, or.
Which he continues to make sculpture in the 60s in particular.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
in his
see,
pop
I think
era.
he always made. I mean, he always made sculpture. He made it, in the 40s, and he made it in the 50s, and up throughout his life.
Yes, throughout his life, yes.
But he's really known as a painter, not a sculptor.
Yeah, well, but it's always very interesting to work in those, because the sculptures still deal with two dimensions in 3 dimensions.
Yes.
So, they still continue
the flatness.
With the flatness of things. So, just back where where are we in this time? And, of course, Jasper Johns and Roy Lichtenstein and Robert Rauschenberg, and these, very core things that are happening with the flag and the bed, I must say, both in MoMA's collection. This reinvention of painting, which I think must have given tremendous, permission to this younger generation who were working at that time, even though they were still figuring out their way. But, Johns's, frozen gesture, the idea of almost taking the marks of a de Kooning or this authenticity of the mark of Klein, and then, freezing it, if you will, in this very frozen way. Or then, of course, the Rauschenberg bed, and the notion of the combine of being something on the wall, as sculpture and painting simultaneously. When did you meet Johns and Rauschenberg? Was it later in the 60s? Or?
Well, I actually met Roy in 1963. No, 1964, when we were doing the Great American Supermarket show. And I mean, shortly thereafter, I met Johns and Rauschenberg and Rosenquist and George Siegel. One thing I want to say, I mean, the art world was really pretty small in those days. You could, I mean, there were mostly people from Western Europe and San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. I mean, in a way, you could almost name everyone. I mean, the fact that it's so global now is heartening because it means really that these other countries have actually become wealthy enough to support an artist class.
Yes,
so,
which is
but
very good.
it's overwhelming. I mean, I would think, to try to follow contemporary art these days.
I think it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Greg, I'm looking at you. It's like, I mean, it's in a way now we almost have a kind of niche. You can follow what you're interested in. I mean, if you're working in an institution, if you're a curator, it makes it very hard because, well, it's impossible. And also one has to go with what their expertise is. You know, there's certain areas of the world, I'm a cultural tourist. But the exciting part is actually being able to work with curators and artists from various different parts of the world. And at times even to find that there's simultaneous initiatives. Sometimes there are things that are happening at different parts of the world at the same time, but in very different ways, and that's genuinely exciting.
Well, that was really true with pop. I mean, there were people artists in Eastern Europe.
Very much so. South America. Who
were doing that same kind of work, but they didn't get the support and the encouragement. So, I mean, Roy really felt strongly that luck plays such a big part. You know, I mean, you have to do the work, but if you're in the right place, that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And there was a feeling at that time about American exceptionalism in art.
Yes.
It's become something terrible now.
Yes.
But
yes.
But
it's interesting. I remember when I started to work at Tate Modern in 1999, just before it opened, and you know, there was still this feeling in a way also that, you know, American art really never came on the world stage until Abstract Expressionism. So those collections, for instance, there was like no Hopper having, you know, of course, having worked at the Whitney, knowing that collection so well, you would not find, you were lucky if you found a Georgia O'Keeffe. You know, Arthur Dove was unknown. Marston Hartley became better known, but all of those aspects of early 20th century American art were really not known at all. And it's still a little bit, it's still a bit of a challenge in that way.
I didn't go to that opening, but all the people I knew came back and they were saying they didn't like the exhibition.
Which one?
At the Tate,
when
the
Tate
Hopper? Opened.
The opening show.
Show of the Tate. And then when I finally saw it, I realized it was not Americentric.
No,
in
not
any
at all.
way whatsoever. And it was a big, kind of a blow, I think, in a way to that, you know, the American ego that thought America was.
Yeah, and yet ironically, I can say that a huge number of the donors to Tate Modern were American. So that's a whole other, you know, kind of thing. But just a little aside, one of the shows I was involved with was called Century City. And at the time, it was 9 cities at different moments in their histories, and this idea of the city as the engine of the modern. Now, coming from the US, having grown up here, I decided I wasn't going to do AbEx, I wasn't going to do pop. And my colleagues were very, you know, supportive. And it was a time when we were talking about the 70s, so I did New York from 68 to 72. Well, I was absolutely like raked over the coals by the British press, which just said, where's Rothko and it was really fascinating. And then somebody wrote, you know, where is Cindy Sherman? To which I would have said to them, well, she was in high school. But the British press is that's a whole other thing. So again, this looking, you know, I can't, of course I have to put some Warhol slides in, but you know, but it's interesting to me that, you know, here you have Roy, here you have Warhol, both, you know, working away. Of course, Warhol is earning his living as a commercial illustrator. I. Miller Shoes was one of his really major accounts, but he's looking at what popular culture is looking at Elvis Presley, James Dean, and you know, and he's also, these have a strong homoerotic quality because that was Warhol's thing, was to be able to find symbols, subjects that could focus, that worked on those various, sorts of levels, and also tapping into the press. Of course, James Dean was killed in a car crash, in '55. So, Roy is really now working in a way that's moving him to something not so different, because if we think of the American West, if we think of that mythology, I don't think it's a massive leap, subject-wise, to get to Bugs Bunny. And I think this is where you do see, though, his incredible draftsman, his quality as a draftsman. I mean, this is such an amazing drawing. I think there was a great show at the Morgan of the drawings that Isabel.
Black and white.
Yeah, it was a fantastic exhibition. And, and there he is, and to go to that, kind of subject matter. And that's why the de Kooning reference is interesting to me, because of this sort of brushy, quality, or this one, Mickey Mouse 1. There's several Mickeys, that he was making at that time. Again,
that still looked like art to him.
Yes, that's a really important statement, what you just said. It still looked like art. It still had that kind of gesture of the hand. And, that's something, I mean, Warhol deals with that as well, which is, can I get rid of the drips? Can I get rid of all of that? But you're absolutely right. It still looked like art. And, I mean, of course, it would have been interesting to have known how he looked at this early material. Did he still see it as, was he still excited by it later on? It's always fascinating, because we curators and art historians always want to go backwards, and artists always want to go forwards. Most artists don't like to talk about like the old stuff. I'm looking at Mary, right, Mary? Right? We just want to talk.
Well, he did say when he looked at that Look Mickey, the first paintings of cartoons, that he had to get beyond the level of his own taste as an artist, because it didn't look like art to him, but he couldn't leave it alone.
Yeah.
I mean, he felt compelled to.
So something he knew.
Yeah.
Whatever that thing is.
And then, of course, because he was at Rutgers with Alan Caprow and various people, they were really encouraging.
He had a lot of support. That's, where a scenario like that makes such a difference, to have that kind of support. And I found this great, when Roy starts with these kind of paintings. And now what I find so surprising, because I remember when we were working on hand-painted pop, and I went to the potato barn where these were stored at the time. And it was like a treasure trove for me. And Roy was very gracious and allowed us to include these paintings, but at the time they are listed in the catalog as private collection.
Yes.
So, which, he still, I mean, this is in '92, still had a feeling on for whatever reason, did not want that to be listed.
He didn't refer to those who were the earlier paintings, but he always kept them. He kept them. So they had to have some.
One of the things that this exhibition has taught me, though, is that I always wondered, so why does he do this in '58? And then he does this in '60, which to me felt like going backwards. But actually, I've come to see it completely differently now. When Roy himself talks about constructing these paintings, and I think this is what you were getting at in terms of the conceptual side of things. He even said something about when he was making these paintings, that it was like making an object. So the brushstroke now becomes dealt with very differently. It's a component in a very different kind of way.
You could say it's lacking in angst.
Yes, no, yes. David Sally said something about some of the, the importance of line in the work, and that it could be, quote, both mechanical and expressive. Diagrammatic, flat, a cliche, pitch-perfect blend of irony, absurdity, and cliche. And in a way, this is a cliched line. You know, it's really a line, it's like an illustration of a line, so to speak.
Maybe it portends the brushstrokes in later.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that, but I completely changed my thing, because I thought, oh, why did he go backwards? I mean, it was a riddle to me. But now he wasn't going backwards. Actually, he really was going forward. And, you know, that idea, again, of this like cliched line, that it's ironic without angst. Without angst. And, you know, wasn't second generation abstract expressionism. It was really something different. On the surface, you might think it was, but it's really, you know, quite different. And then, you know, again, I always like to, you know, just thinking about what else is going on at that time. And these were some things we had in hand-painted pop. Jim Rosenquist, who was a sign painter at that time, the Astoria sign painting company. And he said that one of the things, I remember interviewing him, that, you know, he was up close to the signs. So he said everything was an abstraction, because he was making these giant signs. And then this really early, you know, Ed Ruscha, and of course Ruscha was at the Chouinard School and working with commercial graphics. So it's very interesting, you know, artists coming from these different perspectives. I mean, actually, Roy, this is very different than where Ruscha was and Warhol, because they were, you know, they had kind of day jobs, so to speak.
Well, although, I mean, after he lost tenure and moved to Cleveland, he worked as a draftsman for a place called Republic Steel.
That's right.
So
that's right.
He had a day job.
That's right. I think maybe David Disher in that article talks about this impact of that generation of artists working in, you know, commercial design, and the lessons learned, you know, within that. And so we get to this, you know, early 10 cents, you know, which is just really kind of fabulous. Just this giant, like, you know, it's like Myron Stout becomes something.
Right,
you know,
right. I never thought of that.
Well, I just love the way it fills the entire, you know, frame. It's not just 10 cents, it's 10 cents. It's like, you know, it's like that kind of a, you know, a kind of a thing. It's like really very, you know, sort of gutsy. And then, as we were saying, you know, the early, and these are amongst the earliest ones, you know, that are going on. So Paul Schimmel, my colleague, of course, was convinced that, you know, this was the reference to Klein, that this was about the Cedar Tavern where everybody was beating each other up. I mean, I don't know.
Maybe subconsciously.
I don't know. Maybe, yeah, maybe. I mean, it just seemed to make sense given.
Right. I mean,
it's possible.
Metaphorically.
Yes, metaphorically. I didn't quite see that, but that idea, once again, of working from, you know, the comics, which is to some extent a kind of American mythology, and, you know, the power of popular culture. I mean, you could argue that it's all myth. You know, I mean, but it's powerful. You know, I think about the kinds of movies being made, like the impact of something like Black Panther. You know, how important it is that popular culture, it represents a wide swath of the populace, because these are very powerful things that, of course, come out of Greek mythology. So it's not like it was just invented yesterday, but these are things that live, you know, in the popular imagination. And then, of course, I think it's not the greatest reproduction, don't get mad at me, but, you know, look, Mickey, I've
looks better online.
Yeah, sorry about that. Not very good repro there. So, you know, when we get into these, again, early, you know, very, again, diagrammatic, funny, the step-on can. I think there's one that's a before and after where it's like repairing the screen. Repairing the screen. You know, and these are all based on very everyday kinds of ads, you know, that you find in newspapers. I mean, I love this because I don't know why it always makes me laugh when I see this one, and I think, oh, that's kind of an action painting, right? You know, I mean, but it just does have this really you know, dry,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
sense of humor going on. And so you saw Washington crossing the Delaware, and of course, you know, again, or anybody thinks this, okay, what is that work out there? What does it have to do with anything? I mean, you know, now you see the artist's style. And it's interesting to think of those cliched brush marks. And what you were saying about, you know, how the Ben-Day dot really becomes another way of modeling, of creating depth. It's a device that he's using.
Right.
At the same time, it's absolutely looking at where the culture was, which is really not anymore about the original, but about the reproduction of a kind of image world of things as they were printed, and to really almost reduce things to those constituent parts. The Ben-Day dot, now we think of pixels, you know, is to me what was so radical about what the pop artists were doing, because they were speaking very much to their time.
Yeah, it's really how most people saw things in a reproduced image, whatever it was.
Well, there are a lot of artists who, you know, I remember, maybe it was Jim Dine, I remember years ago talking to, who talked about getting to know art through, you know, Arts International, Arts Magazine. That's how they saw art. I mean, you know, if it wasn't in their local museum, particularly like the new, you know, cutting edge things, it was in reproduction. And, you know, that's the world we live in now when we think about the amount of images that are available to us.
Yeah, Instagram and I mean just everything.
Yeah, but
in those
short
flashes.
yes, I'm old-fashioned enough to still value the direct experience, and I hope all of you feel similar. So, okay, so, you know, here's Roy, and as you said, Ivan Karp introduces him, Capro introduces, tells Ivan Karp about the work, and then Castelli ultimately comes to see the work, and that's
Yeah,
the
Roy
breakthrough.
said he was going up the steps of Fort East 77th with these paintings under his arm, and Ivan Karp was saying goodbye to someone, and just happened to grab it and said, "Here's the next." I mean, they didn't know each other, but then he had to leave the paintings there for Leo Castelli to see, and then Bob Rauschenberg had to approve also, because there was an exhibition there that I think one painting came down and another painting went up that Bob was doing. So,
Oh gosh, he had a lot of power.
you know Bob.
Yeah.
I mean, he was. I mean,
Yeah.
he said what he thought.
Yeah. But Castelli clearly, well, and Ileana Sonnabend, I want to give her a shout out, because I think Ileana was so fundamental too. And then of course, they're the two. And Dick Bellamy, you must have known Dick Bellamy then, because he was another
had
key
the Green
figure.
Gallery, and I mean, he was really important, Dick. I mean, well, he showed a lot. Robert Morris, Donald Judd.
Yeah, a lot of the minimalists.
And Sidney Janis actually showed.
Yes.
Well, Dick showed, excuse me, Oldenburg.
Mm-hmm. I think Rosenquist. I think that's
and Rosenquist.
Yeah, I think he's standing in front of a row, because then that's a great collection that he gifted to MoMA. The Sidney Janis collection is really kind of extraordinary.
Tremendous.
So, you know, talking about those marks, you know, I mean, Roy said, this was the one when I interviewed him, he said, well, yeah, it's a collection of marks. And, you know, he's talked about, of course, the Mondrian. And I mean,
plus
and here,
and minus.
yeah, and here you really see this, again, these references, you know, that are going, you know, back and forth. And I mean, that's the thing that I found, you know, so compelling. And I always thought of, when you look for it, are these references to the history of art, and of course the great masterpiece, which is now doing wonderful things for the world. Aggie, thank you very much. Everybody appreciates that, and here mentioning, you know, masterpiece. So, you know, when I started to work at the Dia Foundation, I did a show of the early work of Warhol, of the hand-painted images. And one day I got a call from Andy, and he said, oh, I found these paintings rolled up in a closet. Do you think you're interested, or they be of interest? I said, yeah, of course, I'll be right up there. And young curator. And he rolls out this painting before and after. And if you see, you can see the Ben-Day dots. And I immediately, just said, oh my God, Ben-Day dots. And he looked at it, and in that way of speaking, he just, oh yeah, but then I saw it, and Roy did it so much better. And he said, I think I should paint them out. And then I just said, no, you can't, because it's history. And thankfully he didn't. But
they work.
They work, but it's so interesting. He knew right away that he could not do that because somebody else was doing that. I mean, and so, this is like one of those little tidbits of history. And Dana Cranmer's here, who did all the conservation, probably worked on this one for these paintings. But I always...
Andy, at the opening, you introduced Andy to me.
Yes.
Dana wants to know what the black is. Oh, remember what I do.
We always had this saying to know the difference between schmutz and history. When you're doing conservation, which she understands perfectly. So there you are, you and Roy, as beautiful as ever as you are now, in that incredible. What a lucky find that foundation. Found these, and of course, because you were the director of the Bianchini Gallery. When did you start at Bianchini?
Well, I started in 1963, but we really got more going. I mean, it was a curious gallery. I mean, Paul Bianchini had shows by that Nate Chomsky, the paintings by the chimpanzee. And I mean, and he showed a lot of 18th and 19th century drawings. And I have to give some credit. The man in the middle is Ben Varillo, who was very active at that time. I mean, it was his conception to do the Great American Supermarket.
So there you go.
Yeah, and
I didn't know about the chimpanzees, though.
With Paul Bianchini.
Yeah.
I mean, he was open really to anything. So then we tried, when we did drawing shows, to bring it up and to get a theme and bring it from art history up into contemporary art.
So this must have been a pretty amazing show. I mean, the response to it. And you can see all the artists, that were in it at the time. Bob Watts and Rosenquist, Oldenburg, I mean, and Richard Archwager, who's another important figure, I think, within
Billy Apple.
Billy Apple.
Who just passed away.
He just passed away, Mary Inman, I don't know who.
Mary
I don't know
Inman,
if that worked.
Had a company that made these plastic objects of fake food. That was displayed.
Yeah, here's another. I love this one, because it's really super specials. I mean, it's so perfect, right? But the idea of the American, supermarket, which of course we think of, with, and here's some install. There's an install shot of what it looked like.
That's right. We had Andy initialed a lot of Campbell's soup cans with an AW.
And actual paintings, the Campbell soup paintings.
That's right. And Jasper, there were such simple times. I mean, you could just call up Jasper, lent us his ale cans. I mean, nobody thought anything was that. There was a lot of freedom in that things didn't have such a high value of dollars on them.
Yeah, there's another. I love this. I love the one with the white gloves in the front with her soup can.
Yeah.
Wow, must have been so much fun. Just fun, and that Robert Watts, which I did not realize until I saw this, because this was a piece. It was one of my first acquisitions at the Whitney, and I was like, oh, now I know where it's from. So what was do you remember the reception to the show at the time, and what some of the people were, when they came in to see it? Were they excited or?
They were. I mean,
shocked?
We were right around the corner from Leo Castelli. I don't think the people that came were really shocked.
And I have a few, and of course there was, the Oldenburg store earlier
right.
on. And then these are, I just think, fantastic. Wow, such fun. There's Ivan Karp and Ultraviolet, John Chamberlain. These are all happening at the Bianchini Gallery.
That was right, Robert Stanley's opening.
And then there's Roy. And there's Chamberlain having a good time.
Always.
Always having a good time. Yeah. I think there was a lot of fun.
There was. I mean, I'm thinking there was a freedom. I don't know if I said this to you before, but I think the whole idea of the struggling artist was about 100 years old, from 1860 to 1960. And there was sort of a safety in that feeling that you weren't going to be recognized and you weren't going to be successful. But then I think as of 1960, Warhol becomes a symbol of celebrity. And then it's really from then on, like artists start thinking about it's a career, being famous for being famous, having 15 minutes of fame. Because say from Manet to Warhol, there was a lot of freedom in thinking that you were part of the Salon de Refusés.
Yes. Well, people still hate Warhol for that, I will say. You either love him or you hate him in that sense. But no, but it's an interesting thing about that kind of, the freedom that they had. And sometimes for artists, they didn't have anything to lose. There's that
That's right.
aspect of it too. So just, going full circle, I think, again, finding the everyday object and its relationship.
That's right. But like the composition book is sort of like Pollock.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that reference was there, for him. And then, the fantastic brushstrokes painting. So I hope that we've taken you to, not to be corny, but to before and after the dots, and given you some information. I'm going to take some questions.
Right, sure.
Yeah. This is great, Dorothy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great.
It was fun. Good. That's what I wanted. I think we have time to take some questions. So I don't know. You just want to stand up if you have a question or if you have an answer, whichever. We'll always have a question. Could you? I can't hear you. So if nobody matter. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to make 2 comments. One was that John's, in the essay, in his essay that he wrote on John's, begins by saying systems, not subjects. And I kind of think it's both things. And then the Rauschenberg proceeds to request the movement. Says whereas we had black and then would follow his camera from either side. We saw that what is the biggest reason? The idea of just the competition, but the idea of wanting a certain change goes back to all of the attention to the abstract expressionists.
Great, thank you. I think the systems is really important because I think Roy and many of those artists were really looking at all these different systems. And I remember when I interviewed Roy, and he talked about the sort of the industrial and the international, and that these were languages that, because they were beyond words. There's the words within the comics, but many of the works function without words, and that they're almost a kind of, if you think of the international symbols, that you see, the stop sign or, handicapped or certain kinds of language, vernacular symbols that, you immediately know what they are. And I think that's probably also why pop was so popular in Europe and, well, particularly in Germany. The Germans had a whole other Marxist,
but it was
analysis.
mostly German art dealers that came. in the early 60s.
Yes, well, Heiner Friedrich, who was one of the founders of the Dia Art Foundation, where I
And
am,
Rudolf
of course,
Zwirner.
and Rudolf Zwirner, you know, they were
Yeah.
absolutely, they created the great Stroher collection and the Ludwig collection. They were, you know, incredible supporters of pop. Other questions, comments? Please.
You speak of the before and after the dots. I'm just wondering if you could comment or amplify the space between the two. What would your reflections be on the transition from one side to the other?
Well, that's interesting to think about.
Well, I'll just say that
Yeah, please.
when Roy started doing
Thank you.
he decided to limit his palette. I mean, he told me that. So it was going to be basically primary colors. But I think he saw the dots as a way, since he wasn't going to do, say, a flesh tone, he was going to put red dots on the face to symbolize skin, or maybe double up the dots to symbolize a shadow. I mean, people have still, isn't Damien Hirst still doing dots?
He was, I don't know.
International.
International.
But I mean, I think it was used as part of his decision to use primary colors in his new style of painting.
Is that? Yeah, I mean, to me, I guess it's almost like I guess I see, maybe if I had to call this before, during, and, well, I don't know if there's an after the dots in a way, because in a way
this is an early one.
Yeah,
So,
this is 63, so.
you know, the magnifying
yeah.
glass. I mean,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I
do love
it's
that
kind of
painting.
ironic and
No, I think it's
a
fantastic.
dumb idea. And
Well, and he talks a lot about being attracted. Diane Waldman interviews, and he talks about being attracted to dumb subjects. And and I always like to say that it's not easy to do dumb. It's easy to do stupid. There really is, the surrealists we're really great at the dumb. It's not so easy to do dumb. Try it sometime. See. There are other questions or comments? Anyone here?
Did the sculpture follow the same chronology as the painting? I know you mentioned the early sculptures made out of the broken furniture, and then I know later on with the casting and the birds and the fish and the scale, got enormous. But was there like a steady growth?
well, actually, compared to your sculpture outside, they're pretty small. But I mean, Roy, I think, had already done explosion sculptures when I met him. I mean, that again is the idea of freezing, you know, freezing a brushstroke or freezing
An action,
an explosion.
Yeah, freezing was good. I never thought of it that way, but that really makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stillness,
But,
very
you know,
palpable.
we had stationery made because he had to order steel or something from a company. And I remember he drew this stupid picture of a factory, and we made stationery with it so that when he wrote to manufacturers to ask for perforated paper or something, they would think he had a factory.
He had a factory. That's so great. That's really great. I think, oh.
I just, sorry, I get curious about this, because the hundreds of long you mentioned color. And I wondered if you reflected at all on the really kind of difficult, muddy brown color, particularly Washington Cross and Dover. So that whole suite of paintings, and there's a lot of that group is really tough color-wise. And I find it interesting. I really thought about it at all.
I didn't know him. I mean, it may
Mm.
have been, he probably had some trouble affording paint at that time. It could, who knows? I mean, he was generally intentional about
Yeah.
what he did, without question, but
it is a somber
it is,
palette.
and I mean, that whole palette is really not what you think of as Lichtenstein.
Mm, mm. I encourage people to get the book. I get no royalties from saying this, but I know it's available in the bookstore. But it's really an excellent book, beautifully designed, fantastic essays, and definitely, here, I'll hold it up for the photo. And, you know, shout out to Colby College, who organized the exhibition, and the curators there for their work. And Dorothy, I just am so grateful to you. And this was
Please,
fun. I think
fun to me.
we'll have to do part 2 and figure out what we're going to do. And thank all of you. You really made it so fun.
Great.
No.
Well, I learned a lot.
Well, so did I. So did I. Yeah, it was really great. Yeah.